What would you do if the seat you paid for, the one you specifically reserved after a long, exhausting week, was suddenly taken from you by someone who simply believed they had more right to it? Imagine this. You've just survived back-to-back meetings in Phoenix, the kind that leave your body drained and your patience tested. Your phone hasn't stopped buzzing. Your calendar looks like a battlefield of overlapping calls and deadlines, and even your coffee seems to be asking for a coffee of its own. All you want is peace, a smooth flight home to Dallas, and the comfort of the seat you carefully selected at booking. For David Johnson, that seat wasn't just a place to rest. It was his small promise of comfort at the end of a relentless week. Except, this flight was about to test him in ways no meeting boardroom ever could. David arrived early at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, the way he always did. He believed in order, in preparation, in never rushing. That discipline had shaped his career and life. He moved with quiet confidence, carrying only a slim leather briefcase, his phone tucked neatly into his jacket. As he walked to his gate, he noticed the usual chaos: families juggling strollers, business travelers glued to laptops, tired parents trying to calm restless children. But David's mind was fixed on one thing: making it home. When boarding was announced, he joined the line, scanning his ticket, first class 3A window. That small luxury he allowed himself, not just for space, but for peace. He walked down the jet bridge, greeting the flight attendant with a polite nod before stepping into the cabin, except something was wrong. As David approached his seat, he froze. A woman, mid-40s, blonde hair perfectly styled, designer scarf draped around her shoulders, was already sitting there. She didn't look uncomfortable, didn't look confused. She looked as if she belonged, as if she had claimed it without question. David stopped, checked his ticket, then glanced again. Seat 3A, his seat. He cleared his throat softly, offering a polite smile. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "I believe this is my seat." The woman didn't even turn her head at first. She adjusted her sunglasses, glanced up with faint irritation, and replied, "No, it's mine." Her voice was sharp, dismissive, the kind of tone that assumed authority without proof. David, still composed, extended his boarding pass slightly toward her, as if to clarify. "It's clearly marked," he explained. But before he could continue, the flight attendant approached, and the air in the cabin shifted. The flight attendant's smile was professional, polished, but there was an unmistakable flicker of discomfort in her eyes. She glanced at David's boarding pass, then at the woman already settled into 3A. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that feels heavier than words. Other passengers began to notice, eyes lifting from newspapers, earbuds, and laptops, curiosity filling the aisle. "Ma'am," the attendant began gently, "can I see your ticket, please?" The woman shifted in her seat as if the request itself were offensive. She sighed, reached into her handbag with deliberate slowness, and handed over her ticket with a tight smile. "Here," she said. "But I know I'm in the right place." David stood motionless, calm but firm, his boarding pass still visible in his hand. He had dealt with boardroom politics, corporate takeovers, and negotiations worth billions. Yet here he was, in a crowded plane, forced to justify his right to sit where he had paid to sit. The attendant compared the tickets. One said 3A, the other said 12C, economy middle row. Her smile stiffened as she looked back at the woman. "Ma'am, your seat is in 12C. This is 3A, and it belongs to this gentleman." For most people, that would have been the end of it. But the woman laughed softly, a laugh meant for the audience of other passengers as much as for herself. "You must be mistaken," she said, shaking her head. "I can't possibly sit back there. I was told I could move up here. Besides," her eyes flicked to David briefly, dismissively, "does it really matter?" That sentence cut through the air like glass shattering on marble. David's jaw tightened. Around them, whispers began. Some passengers frowned, others shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. The attendant tried again, firmer this time. "Ma'am, you'll need to move." "This seat isn't yours." The woman's expression hardened. "I'm not moving, and if you force me, I'll have your job." David's patience was legendary, but injustice was something he had never learned to tolerate quietly. He leaned slightly forward, his voice low but steady. "You're in my seat," I've asked politely. "I've waited for reason, but respect is not optional." The attendant looked torn, caught between procedure and confrontation. Before she could decide, another flight attendant joined, whispering into her ear. Then came the words David had heard too many times in too many different forms. "Sir, would you mind taking another seat so we can depart on time?" The implication was clear. In this battle between comfort and principle, the airline was choosing convenience. For a moment, David didn't respond. He stood there in silence, letting the words sink in. The irony was bitter. He had paid for the seat, followed every rule, arrived early, and yet somehow he was the one being asked to move. It wasn't about the cushion of leather or the glass of champagne that would come before takeoff. It was about principle, about dignity, about respect. The woman smirked as if she had won some unspoken battle. She leaned back, crossed her legs, and folded her arms with the smugness of someone accustomed to bending. Rules in her favor. Her confidence was louder than any words she might have spoken. Passengers were watching. A few shifted in their seats, embarrassed by the blatant unfairness unfolding before them, but no one said anything. Silence can be as heavy as judgment, and in that silence, David felt the weight of centuries of similar stories, moments where voices were ignored, where fairness was sacrificed for convenience, where dignity was treated as negotiable. He could have sat down in the empty seat the attendant was offering. He could have decided to let it go, to avoid the scene, to trade peace for comfort. But David hadn't built his life, his company, or his reputation by surrendering to injustice. He knew when to fight, and this, though small in appearance, was a battle worth fighting. With controlled calm, he spoke again, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had been underestimated before. "No, I will not move to another seat. This is mine, and I have every right to sit in it." The attendants exchanged uneasy glances. One picked up the phone near the galley, whispering quickly to the captain. The tension in the cabin thickened. A few passengers muttered words of support under their breath, while others simply turned away, unwilling to be involved. David didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He simply stood his ground. The woman, however, leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. "People, like you should be grateful you're even on this flight," she sneered, her words barely above a whisper but sharp enough to cut. That was it. A hush fell over those who overheard. The ugliness of her intent was unmistakable. This was no longer about a seat. This was about dignity stolen in broad daylight. David's eyes narrowed, not with rage, but with resolve. He had endured enough to know that sometimes silence isn't strength, it's surrender. And tonight, surrender was not on the table. The captain himself soon emerged from the cockpit, his presence commanding silence as he stepped into the aisle. He was a tall man with silver hair tucked neatly beneath his cap, his voice practiced in authority. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, though the tightness in his tone suggested he already knew. The lead flight attendant explained quickly, holding both tickets in her hand. David remained calm, still standing beside the disputed seat. The woman, however, took the opportunity to spin her version of the story. "This man is causing a scene," she said smoothly. "I was told I could sit here. He's being aggressive and making everyone uncomfortable." It was a bold lie delivered with confidence. David didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. He had seen this tactic before, the shifting of blame, the subtle twisting of facts to favor those already cloaked in privilege. He knew the truth would stand if he remained composed. The captain glanced at David, then at the woman, then at the ticket in his hand. His brow furrowed. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "your ticket clearly says 12C. This seat belongs to him." For the second time, the matter should have ended there. But the woman crossed her arms defiantly. "I am not moving. And if this airline has any respect for its customers, you'll make other arrangements." "Other arrangements?" David's jaw tightened. It was a phrase he had heard before in different guises. Always a way of saying you don't belong here, someone else does. The captain sighed, turning to David. "Sir, would you be willing to sit in another seat this time? We need to depart." David's reply was steady, unwavering. "No, Captain. I booked this seat. I paid for this seat. I have every right to it. If anyone should move, it's her." The tension now rippled across the cabin like a storm cloud. Passengers leaned closer, phones discreetly raised to capture the moment. The quiet was electric, heavy with anticipation. The captain hesitated, clearly weighing the inconvenience of escalating conflict against the principle of fairness. But David wasn't giving him room to compromise. He had already decided. This moment would not pass silently into another story of quiet endurance. Then, calmly but with unmistakable authority, David reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. With a few swift taps, he opened an app no one else could recognize. The glow of the screen illuminated his face as he whispered, a single sentence that would shift the power dynamic completely. The words didn't boom or thunder, but their weight was undeniable. At first, passengers thought they had misheard him. A few chuckled under their breath, assuming it was some clever bluff. But David's eyes didn't waver. His tone carried no trace of theater. He spoke like a man used to decisions that altered the course of more than just one flight. The captain frowned, confusion flashing across his face. "Excuse me?" he asked. David's phone screen glowed with a corporate dashboard, a private network, an app only a handful of people in the aviation world possessed access to. He tapped again, the interface confirming what only he could authorize. I said, "Ground the plane. This aircraft, this airline, now." Whispers rippled through the cabin like fire catching dry grass. The woman in 3A, her arrogance still perched on her shoulders like that designer scarf, laughed dismissively. "What on earth do you think you're doing? You don't have that kind of power." But then the lead flight attendant's earpiece crackled. Her eyes widened. She looked at the captain, then back at David, her voice dropping. "Sir, is your name David Johnson?" A collective gasp moved through the front cabin. Recognition dawned like lightning. David Johnson, the CEO of the very airline they were sitting on. The architect of its meteoric rise, the man whose signature had appeared on every major policy change and deal in the past decade. A man whose authority didn't just extend to boardrooms, but to every plane carrying his company's logo in the sky. The captain's face paled. He knew instantly the command was not a bluff. David Johnson had the power to ground not just one plane, but the entire fleet if he deemed it necessary. His authority didn't require debate. Passengers began murmuring louder now, phones recording openly. Some leaned in, whispering about the woman in 3A, their expressions turning from curiosity to disdain. The weight of her earlier words, dismissive, cutting, cruel, now turned back on her with brutal clarity. She hadn't just stolen a seat. She had humiliated the very man whose vision made this flight possible. David spoke again, his voice even but laced with finality. "No one on my airline will ever be told their dignity is less important than convenience, not while I sit at the helm." The cabin was silent except for the quiet hum of the aircraft systems. The captain swallowed hard, suddenly aware of the stakes. The woman's confidence faltered, her smirk collapsing into something tighter, more fragile. The power had shifted entirely. The silence stretched, heavy and absolute. The woman's hands gripped the armrests now, her earlier bravado evaporating. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught, tangled in the realization of who she was facing. Around her, passengers no longer looked away. They stared, their expressions carved with judgment, recording every second of a moment that would soon live far beyond the cabin walls. David didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice or deliver the kind of monologue she might have expected from a man suddenly revealed as powerful. Instead, he spoke with calm precision, his words directed at her but meant for everyone. Respect is not optional. Courtesy is not negotiable. And dignity will never be sacrificed for comfort on my watch. The captain, regaining his composure, cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson, what are your instructions?" David glanced at the woman once more. "Escort her to her assigned seat," he said evenly. "And if she refuses, remove her from the aircraft." Gasps followed, but no one questioned him now. The attendants moved swiftly. The woman, red-faced and trembling, finally rose, her designer scarf slipping, slightly as she stumbled, down the aisle toward the economy cabin. When David finally sat in 3A, the silence broke into hushed applause. Not loud, not raucous, but steady, respectful, a ripple of acknowledgement that fairness had been restored. As the plane prepared for takeoff, David leaned back, closed his eyes, and allowed himself the rarest comfort of all, peace earned through principle.